Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that can be pretty confusing for, well, just about all of us. That incredibly complicated link between how we feel and what we desire.
And we're going to jump right in with a question that, let's be honest, feels a little uncomfortable, but is way more common than you might think. Why do people sometimes find themselves crying during sex? Or, on the flip side, why do we sometimes feel this rush of desire right after a huge fight? It seems like a total contradiction, but believe me, there's a kind of hidden logic to it, and that's what we're going to unpack today.
So, to really get to the bottom of this, we first have to completely rethink how we view the relationship between our feelings and our physical urges. This is what we can call the paradox of emotion and desire.
Okay, so check this out. For the longest time, the thinking was really black and white. You're either sad or you're turned on. One cancels out the other, right? But what we're learning now is that it's not some simple on-off switch at all. It's actually a really complex interactive system where our emotions and our desires are constantly talking to each other. Sometimes they suppress each other, sometimes they amplify each other, and sometimes they get all mixed up.
So, how does the system actually work? Well, let's start with the side of things that probably makes the most intuitive sense to us. How certain really strong emotions can just hit the brakes on desire.
And you can probably guess which ones we're talking about. You see the pattern here, right? Intense fear, really high anxiety, that deep, heavy sadness or depression, or even strong feelings of shame or guilt. All of these put our entire system on high alert.
And that alert triggers a whole biological chain reaction. The moment one of these emotions hits, your body gets flooded with stress hormones. It basically flips a switch and goes into survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, your body has one priority and one priority only: staying safe. Things that aren't essential for immediate survival, and yeah, from a biological standpoint, sexual desire is one of those things, they get pushed way down the list.
Okay, so that part makes a lot of sense, but that brings us right back to the central puzzle, doesn't it? What about the opposite? What's going on in those moments when anger or sadness or stress seems to do the complete reverse and actually cranks up our desire? This, my friends, is where things get really interesting.
The answer lies in a really cool psychological phenomenon called excitation transfer. Now, think about it for a second. The way your body physically reacts to any intense emotion is, well, it's pretty much the same. A racing heart, breathing faster, that jolt of adrenaline. That could be anger, it could be fear, or it could be intense excitement. Your body doesn't really label it. So excitation transfer is what happens when your brain takes all that stirred up energy from one thing, like a heated argument, and it sort of misreads the label. It transfers that arousal onto a different target, like your partner, and suddenly your brain interprets all that intensity as sexual desire. But you know, the biology of it all is really only half the picture. There's a whole other layer to this, a much deeper psychological one. Because we have to remember that sex is often not just about sex. It's a form of communication. And this is such a crucial idea to grasp. A lot of the time, what our brains register as "I feel desire" isn't purely a physical need. It can actually be a much deeper emotional need that doesn't really have the vocabulary to express itself, so it uses the language of physical intimacy instead.
And sometimes that unspoken message is incredibly simple. It's just, I want to feel close. When you've been feeling distant or disconnected, physical intimacy can feel like the quickest, most powerful way to close that gap.
Other times, maybe especially after a big fight, that need is a little different. It's about being understood. It's a way of saying, without words, hey, even though we were just at each other's throats, I need to know we're okay. I need to fix this. And really, both of those things often boil down to this one fundamental drive. I want to reconnect. It's about restoring that emotional bond when words just aren't cutting it.
So, okay, we've got the biology, we've got the psychology, but what do we actually do with all this information? How do we start to make sense of these tangled up feelings inside ourselves? That brings us to our last section, figuring out what you truly need.
To get a little bit of clarity here, to untangle what's physical from what's emotional, there's a really simple but incredibly powerful tool you can use. And it all comes down to asking yourself 3 key questions. First question, is the source of this feeling physical or emotional? In other words, is this a feeling of arousal that just kind of showed up in your body on its own? Or did it pop up right after something emotional happened? Maybe you were feeling lonely or anxious, or yeah, right after that argument. The second question builds right on that. What's the trigger? Are you feeling a general need for sexual release that could be met in any number of ways?
Or is it a very specific targeted need for comfort, for reassurance, and for closeness with this specific person, right here, right now? The difference is huge. And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most revealing question. What's the real motive here? If you're really honest with yourself, are you primarily seeking the sensation of physical pleasure? Or are you really seeking the comfort of an emotional connection and a feeling of safety?
Yeah, after going through those questions, you might be hoping for a simple, neat answer. But the most common and frankly the most human reality is this. It's almost always a mix. It's hardly ever just one or the other. True desire is usually this complex cocktail of a physical urge, an emotional need, a desire for security, and a way to express intimacy, all swirled together.
And that really brings us to the single biggest takeaway from all of this. Sex is both a physiological act and a psychological language. Understanding that, knowing that it's both of those things at once, doesn't just solve the little riddle of why someone might cry during sex. It gives us a brand new lens to better understand ourselves, to understand our partners, and the beautifully complex dance of human connection. So the only question left to ask yourself is, what language is your desire speaking?